Professional Call of Duty hater is going to be ranking all of the Call of Duty games from Call of Duty 4 all the way to Modern Warfare 2 2022. And obviously we're going to start off with COD 4, and this is one of the greatest Call of Duty games to have ever been created. If it wasn't for Call of Duty 4 existing and doing what it did with its campaign, with the creative class system, with the prestige system, with introducing kill streaks and the perk system, overall the game being the way that it was and them doing what they did with it, if COD 4 didn't exist, I don't think the Call of Duty franchise would exist as it does today. I don't think it would have been nearly as popular. I don't think people would even be playing it today. I don't think anyone would have had any interest in this franchise. And ultimately, COD 4 has to go at the highest of the highest tiers. It's a GOAT status. It is an S tier game. If you disagree with me in that regard, then you are just objectively wrong. Next up, we have World at War. And even though I'm going to put this in a tier lower than Call of Duty 4, because I think Call of Duty 4 in general is overall more important to the franchise than World at War, the reason why World at War is so high in the tier list for me is for two things. The campaign being as much of a masterpiece as it was, I would actually recommend you go check out the Actman's video on the campaign because he goes way more into detail than I ever could in a video like this. But the thing that really elevates World at War, for me personally, and probably for a lot of people as well, is zombies. Unlocking the zombies mode at the end of the campaign and seeing all those undead people walking and running towards you, towards the camera, and then all of a sudden you're in Nocturne Toten. It was one of the key pivotal moments in Call of Duty history. Zombies is so integral and vital to the franchise that if Treyarch didn't create this mode, who knows like what their games would have been like in the future? Who knows where zombies would have been in the future? Maybe they wouldn't have continued doing more of the zombies mode. Who knows if we would have gotten such amazing maps like Ascension and Origins and Mob of the Dead and so many other iconic maps that you associate with Call of Duty Zombies. So if it wasn't for the importance and the creation of the Call of Duty Zombies mode with Nocturne Toten and its subsequent DLCs that they eventually later on added, I don't think Call of Duty Zombies would have been nearly as popular. So Zombies is very vital and pivotal to the franchise, and that's why it's so high in the tier list for me. It's a great game overall, though. This next game is probably going to be a little bit of a hot take for a lot of people, to be honest, and that's Modern Warfare 2, the original from 2009. This is going to be a tier lower for me, and I think it's a good game. But ultimately, it's sort of like junk food. Junk food tastes really good, and you like enjoying and eating junk food. You know, it tastes good, but it's bad for you. And that's sort of what Modern Warfare 2 is for me personally. You know, it's buggy. There's a lot of really overpowered shit that exists within the game, like one-man army noob tubes, but at the same time, it was the birthplace and arguably the start of the popularity that was Call of Duty trick-shotting and sniping. And Modern Warfare 2, the multiplayer experience is so much fun, and the campaign is so big and bombastic, and they like really elevated in many regards in terms of the campaign with Modern Warfare 2. But ultimately for me, whenever I would go back and play Modern Warfare 2, I always felt like I could only play it for a certain amount of time, and I would want to get off and go play something else. Like I would want to go back and play COD 4, because even though there was some crazy stuff in that game as well, like stopping power M16s, martyrdom, and ×3 grenades and stuff, it still felt more of a polished game, and it still felt more, what's the word I'm looking for? Condensed, right? If Modern Warfare 2 was sort of like junk food, then COD 4 was like a nice steak, you know? A nice steak that's been on the grill and it's been marinating in the sauce for like a few hours, and it just tastes really good, and you enjoy the steak that you're eating, and that's what COD 4 sort of is, and you enjoy that so much that you want to have more and more and more of it, and you never really get tired of it. Whereas Modern Warfare 2 is sort of like junk food, and you sort of get tired of playing it after a while, and you want to play something else. It's still a good game, you know, I'm not knocking it for anything. I just think that it's a lower tier than World at War and COD 4, because those two games have two things that are so pivotal and important to the franchise that, for me personally, those have to be higher on the tier list overall. But Modern Warfare 2 is still an amazing game. If they brought it back, if they brought back the multiplayer at least, because they did remaster the campaign, but if they remastered the multiplayer, would I try it out? Maybe. That would have to depend on my mood, but, you know, Modern Warfare 2 is still a great game. I'm not knocking it for anything, but is still, I think, weaker than World at War and COD 4. Next up, we have Call of Duty Black Ops 1, and I'm a little bit biased with this game just simply because of the fact that Black Ops 1 was the first COD game that I ever had the Call of Duty multiplayer experience with. But ultimately, the reason why I have this higher than Modern Warfare 2 is just because I prefer the way that the maps are designed, I prefer the sound effects and the music, I prefer the way that the game feels, both in terms of its gunplay and just overall playability. The campaign, I find it more interesting than Modern Warfare 2, and they expanded upon an entirely new storyline for Black Ops 1, and the storyline is amazing. And then, of course, zombies, they expanded it upon even more than what they had already done with World at War, with both Kino der Toten and its DLC maps, like Moon. Moon is one of the best maps in the entire zombies game mode, and you can't imagine it never not existing. There's a lot that goes into Black Ops 1 for me personally that makes me prefer it more than Modern Warfare 2. I admit that with this one, it's super biased, right, just because of my own personal experience with the games, and this being the first game of the franchise that I had that multiplayer experience with. And if you disagree, that's perfectly fine. This is actually one of the few games on the list where I feel like you could have it in multiple different spots and I would actually be kind of okay with it. But I love Black Ops 1. Zombies was amazing, the campaign was awesome, and the multiplayer was just incredibly fun to play. So that's just my personal take. Next up, we have arguably another game that is probably also going to be a little bit of a hot take, and that's Modern Warfare 3. And it's higher than Modern Warfare 2 in my opinion, but it's still in the same tier in the tier list. And that's simply just because I like it more, but it's not better like by a large margin. I just like the maps better, they flow better, they look better, the guns feel a lot better, it's a lot more polished. I see myself replaying the campaign a lot more than I did Modern Warfare 2, and I also like that it's a conclusion to the overall storyline that was established from the first game to all the way to the last game with Modern Warfare 3. I just like it a little bit more than Modern Warfare 2, but it's not by a super large margin where it's like a tier higher than it. So it's still good, but it's not significantly better. Black Ops 2 is the best of the franchise. The campaign, the multiplayer experience, the zombies. Within the multiplayer, we have the guns, the sound effects, the score streaks, the maps and the way that they're designed. The overall feeling of the game and everything within the multiplayer experience and Call of Duty Zombies from Black Ops 2. Everything about Black Ops 2 is the absolute top tier pinnacle of the franchise, and Black Ops 2 is really where I feel the franchise peaked. And from here on out, when we go further into the next few games, I feel that they have actually gotten worse since then, and that really sucks because you would typically want the games to get better, but Black Ops 2 is still it for me. They haven't been able to replicate the same experience that I had with Black Ops 2 and any other future Call of Duty game. It's just, it can't be beat. It simply cannot be beat for me and for a lot of people, and this would actually be the one game that if they were to remaster completely, it would actually bring me back to the franchise. For this one game, granted, but it would still bring me back. Would they ever do it? Probably not, because Activision are a bunch of greedy assholes, but you know, whatever. Black Ops 2 though, it's the peak of the franchise, it's the best game out of all of them. If they ever want to take anything from any Call of Duty game, they need to take a lot of what they did in Black Ops 2, and they need to realize why this is the best game of the franchise and why people adore it so much. So yeah, not much else to say. It's Black Ops 2. Everyone already knows that it's the best. Let's continue on to the next one. Next up, we have COD Ghost, and while I don't hate it as much as a lot of other people do, mainly just because of the fact that I think the gunplay is actually pretty good, the game tried to experiment in a lot of different ways, and they just didn't really succeed, like with the field objectives kind of being monotonous to do and not really being very rewarding in a lot of instances. They tried to do something different with the prestiging and the perk system, and it wasn't very good. A lot of the maps sucked because this was during a transitional period from the Xbox 360 and the PS3 to the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. So they tried to make the maps bigger so that we'd be able to hold more players, but within doing that, it made it to where the maps were too big and the pacing of the game ended up being super slow because of that. And ultimately, there just wasn't a whole lot to do in terms of content besides of what we already had been doing for the past couple of years and the past couple of games for Call of Duty. So Ghost didn't really expand upon its multiplayer in any significant way that made it unique from other games, and the ways they did weren't very good. And then you have the campaign and Extinction, which both are fucking garbage. They're just not nearly as good as the previous games. And whilst Extinction was kind of interesting because it was different, it still wasn't very good. So COD Ghost It's the beginning of the downcline of the Call of Duty franchise. Not a lot of people like it. I don't hate it as much as other people do, but I understand why people have it really low, and for me, it's still really low on the tier list in comparison to all the other games that we have. Next up, we have Advanced Warfare, and this was the first jetpack/exosuit movement game that we had in the franchise, and the story in the campaign is pretty dated considering the fact that the main villain of the story is Kevin Spacey. So yeah, if you know about what happened, then it's pretty dated. Exo Zombies is just terrible in every single way. There's nothing redeemable about it, it just sucks. And the multiplayer, the best thing that I can say about it is that the maps were actually designed around the movement, so the maps don't end up actually being too bad in the context of it being in Advanced Warfare. But ultimately, the Exo movement, after a while of using it, it gets really tired and really annoying. Most of the gameplay, in terms of every single match that you were in, it was mainly the fact that you were only seeing 2 guns being used, and it was the BAL and the ASM-1, unless you had someone who had a variant of a weapon on either team, and that's because ultimately the game ended up becoming pay to win because of the fact that there were supply drops. This was the first game in the franchise to introduce the idea of supply drops into the franchise, and at first it wasn't pay to win, but they eventually made it to where you can actually buy supply drops, and it became pay to win because a lot of the variants that were available for other guns were just significantly better than the guns that had already existed within the game. And if you weren't using one of the variant weapons, you were just using the BAL and the ASM-1. You weren't actually incentivized for using other guns. Some of the DLC maps were kind of okay, like I said, because in the context of Advanced Warfare, they weren't too bad, but then you have a lot of the cosmetics that are just like so ridiculously over the top that it makes Advanced Warfare stick out, but it's just so over the top and wacky that you can't take it very seriously, and it just ends up being kind of ridiculous because of that fact. Advanced Warfare just wasn't very good. I put a lot of hours into it, granted, but it just didn't really leave much of an impression other than being the first advanced movement game that just kind of sucked. It wasn't horrible, but it just also really sucked at the same time. So yeah, that's Advanced Warfare. Next up is Call of Duty Black Ops 3, the best of the Exo movement games, and the closest that one of the Call of Duty games after Black Ops 2 that almost had the feeling of Black Ops 2 for me personally. It's still only pretty good. It's a pretty good game. The overall multiplayer experience was a lot of fun. The guns felt good, the maps were really well designed. Like I said, the Exo movement was actually not too bad in the game, and it was fair, and it wasn't fucking used and abused as much as it was in the previous game, which was Advanced Warfare. I like the guns, I like the way that it sounds, I like the score streaks, I liked a lot of the game modes that they added, which one of them being Safeguard. Safeguard was a lot of fun. But one of the things that holds multiplayer back is ultimately the supply drop system being as abusive as it was, with a lot of the DLC weapons that they added in afterwards being so incredibly rare that you had to spend potentially hundreds if not thousands of hours trying to get the in-game currency to try to unlock more supply drops. Being able to buy COD points to buy more supply drops was also really scummy. The campaign being so ridiculously bad is just the cherry on top of all of it, being what drags it down so much. But thank God, like, Zombies being as amazing as it was, with Shadows of Evil, Rise and Draw Grovey, and Revelations, and of course Zombies Chronicles, bringing it so far up that it just ends up being an amazing experience with just Zombies by itself. If you go back and you play Black Ops 3, you're mainly playing it for Zombies. And then, of course, on PC, you have the ability to play custom Zombies maps, which thank God they allowed that because it allows so much more replayability. So, yeah. Black Ops 3, a pretty okay game. Mainly going back to play Zombies, and that's probably about it. The best thing about Infinite Warfare was the campaign, and that's about it. By that point, I already stopped caring about Call of Duty campaigns, so the only thing I had left looking forward to was potentially the multiplayer, but unfortunately, the multiplayer didn't do anything of actual substance to make it stand out in any significant way. It came out at the worst time possible when advanced movement type Call of Duty games were at their all-time peak for hatred of how much people didn't want to play them anymore. The Zombies was a terrible experience and just wasn't really fun, even though it was kind of goofy, and at least it was different, but it still wasn't very good. Infinite Warfare sucks. Everyone knows that. It's trash. It's one of the worst games to be created in the franchise. Don't play it. Call of Duty World War II, the game that actually made me quit the franchise entirely. Like I mentioned with Infinite Warfare, by this point I just stopped caring about Call of Duty campaigns, so I didn't really bother to play that. At first, Zombies seemed kind of interesting with a different sort of take that they decided to do, but it ended up being just a washed down version of Treyarch Zombies. And the overall multiplayer experience, we were fooled and we believed at the very beginning that it was actually kind of good and it was pretty good and we enjoyed it and yada yada. But that was just because we were still like on the hype train of hating advanced movement type games, and we thought because this was a boots on the ground type game, we thought that it was immediately better than Infinite Warfare. But It's still not very good. It's a pretty trash game. There wasn't anything to do at the very beginning of the game at launch. They ended up fixing it, and they improved a lot of the things that were wrong with the game way later on in the game's life cycle, but by then, it was too late. People had already quit. People didn't want to return back to the game that they already didn't find very interesting. It was just another World War II shooter that just wasn't nearly as good as World at War. So if it's not World at War, then why even bother playing another World War II shooter? Black Ops 4 is one of the games in the series that I actually really don't like, just simply because of the fact that it doesn't add a campaign. And whilst I said that I don't care about campaign for Call of Duty anymore, this essentially adds in a timer for how long the game's viability and player base is going to stick around, and that pretty much was until the end of its life cycle had concluded and people were already ready to move on to the next game. People were only allowed to then play the multiplayer or the zombies. And the multiplayer, I'm not really a big fan of. The maps aren't too bad, but the overall time to kill and the flow and the pacing on the maps and the games just made the game feel really awkward, and the overall feeling of the game didn't really feel like an actual Treyarch game, and they felt like they were trying to do something different, and because of that, it felt very janky and clunky to me, and it just never really gave off the impression of being a really fun multiplayer experience. And Zombies, of course, made a lot of changes, and some people like the changes, but I'm personally not a fan of it because it sort of just felt like they were trying to change up the formula when they really didn't need to do that. There are people who do like it, and, you know, I heard that it's actually kind of okay, but I'm still just not really for it. I just didn't really like the changes they decided to make with the game, with the Zombies mode overall. And overall, Black Ops 4 just kind of gave off a really sour taste in my mouth, and I just really don't like the game. I was a really big hater of it when it was first released, and I just really don't like Black Ops 4. But at least it's still better than World War II. Next up, we have Modern Warfare 2019, and I don't really like this game. I think they made a lot of changes, and they tried to steer this game into a certain direction that just hindered the Call of Duty franchise in massive ways. They created a new engine, but it ultimately makes the future games after this point feel like almost exactly the same. They designed the maps to be played under a specific playstyle, which ultimately made a lot of players very upset. I'm not a huge fan of Warzone, and I think the only reason why it got as popular as it did is because it came out during a pandemic, and people had nothing better to do. Nobody cared about the Spec Ops mode, and that was exclusive on the PlayStation console for over a year, and no one bothered playing it. And in the campaign, I simply just don't care for. I never really cared about the campaign and the story for Modern Warfare 2019 and Modern Warfare 2 2022. I don't think they're very good. Some of the characters are kind of okay, but I just don't really care about what's actually going on. So Modern Warfare 2019, I think it makes a lot of blunders with footsteps being too loud, the maps being way too big and terrible. The gunsmith is kind of okay, but it overall ends up being way more complicated than it needs to be. It tries to be a realistic style shooter like Rainbow Six Siege when the identity of Call of Duty has always been that it's been an arcade shooter, and overall this is the beginning towards a direction of Call of Duty that I just am not a massive fan of, and it ultimately ends up leading towards one particular game in the future that has been handled in like the worst way possible by its own studio. And we'll get to that in a little bit, but right now, all I have to say about Modern Warfare 2019 is that I think it's pretty trash. Black Ops Cold War suffers from a lot of very similar issues to Modern Warfare 2019. Like I mentioned earlier, Modern Warfare 2019 created a new engine, so the games afterwards that had to use it made it feel very similar to MW19. But thankfully, because it's Treyarch, it still feels like sort of like a Treyarch game. And it wasn't too bad, the gunplay isn't too bad, and the devs who were making the maps for this game actually knew what the fuck they were doing, so the maps aren't god-awful. But I'm still not really that big a fan of it. I just think that it's slightly better overall than Modern Warfare 2019. And as well as I heard that the campaign isn't actually complete crap, I think it's actually, from what I've heard, pretty good, because it did something very similar to Black Ops 2, where they had branching storyline and options that actually changed the output of the story, which is a smart idea. You know, if they did do that, I think that's a great idea, and they should do more of that because it just makes sense. And I heard people actually enjoyed the Zombies mode this year around, and it was better than Black Ops 4, but still not enough for me to want to play the game. It's not something that I really would be seeking out to want to play just for zombies in the campaign, just because I heard good things about it. But yeah, better than Modern Warfare 2019 and World War II and Infinite Warfare, but do I think it's good? No, I think it's still pretty bad. Next up is Call of Duty Vanguard, and say it with me, if it's not World at War, why bother playing it? Because that's what Vanguard is. It's another World War II based shooter, so if it's not World at War, why would I even bother trying to play it? But some people did try to bother playing it, and it was fucking awful. The gunplay sucks, the maps suck, they focus more on trying to get you to buy the bundles, and most of them are complete fucking dog shit, where they tried to steal art from other the artist. The zombies mode is the worst of the franchise and is so laughably terrible that it basically plays itself. The campaign sucks with its stereotypical storylines, bad characters, and even worse writing. And yeah, basically this was just supposed to be another means of being able to add more weaponry into Call of Duty Warzone, because that was the game mode that most people were wanting to play. Vanguard, it doesn't get worse than Vanguard. This is the worst of the franchise, and I'm surprised anyone even bothered trying to play this game for more than a year. It's just absolutely awful. Modern Warfare 2 2022, Modern Warfare II, Modern Warfare Roman numeral 2, whatever you want to call it, for me is in the same tier as Call of Duty Vanguard in my own personal opinion, simply because of the fact that since the launch of the game, I think about like 5-6 months ago now, they have been under-delivering so much content that it's actually ridiculous. The handling of this game and its life cycle so far has been hilariously done very fucking poorly. So not only are they not releasing content for people to actually enjoy, there's not really much to do in the game to begin with, but then you have really loud footsteps, the perk system is garbage, the maps are way too big and poorly designed, there are bugs and glitches everywhere, the game decided not to launch with certain features like leaderboards. Again, people don't really care about the Spec Ops mode. The campaign, for what it's worth, got really popular for a lot of people online through TikTok and many other places on the internet, but I don't really find it too interesting. Some of the characters seemed kind of interesting because they are characters that I have known for a very long time, but they're just not, they don't have personalities that I really care for getting invested into, and the overall narrative just doesn't really strike me as being really entertaining to play through. And overall, just the thing that really digs the nail in the coffin for me for this game is the lack of content, and in the development team of Infinity Ward doing their absolute damnedest to make sure that they're not doing the best that they can with Modern Warfare Roman numeral 2. And of course, there's also Warzone 2, and it's not very good. They basically just made a sequel to the first Warzone game. It's basically the exact same thing, except they actually went back on a lot of features that people liked about Warzone 1 and made them worse. You know, they either took features away or they just changed them and made them even more terrible than they already were from the first Warzone. And they just have been not handling this game very well. They've been doing everything possible to not make this game fun for anybody, whether we're in regard to or into the Rage / Spec Op-ish like mode, the multiplayer, or even Warzone. People just don't like this game. People have been very negative and critical for this game, and it feels like that the devs aren't actually even really listening to the player base. Fans have been clamoring for content, players have been clamoring for them to make changes to the game, but they have just been not doing the best job possible. And you can tell that I'm pretty passionate about this one because this had the chance of being potentially the best of the entire franchise and could have potentially brought back a lot of old players like myself to try out the game again and maybe get back into the franchise. But they just have been digging more nails into the coffin that, you know, cement this game as being one of the worst of the franchise, simply just so far with how they've been handling content for this game, with very little being added, adding in more bundles that are basically just trying to bring back old content that had already been in previous games, so they're recycling a lot of stuff. This entire game has just not been handled the best that it could have potentially been, and I said this months before the game came out, but the game needed to fail if they wanted to actually see change within the game. If players wanted things to change, they needed to speak with their wallet and not with their voices. And instead, the game made damn near $1 billion, so they clearly don't give a shit. And they're not going to continue giving a shit if we don't stand up for what we believe in and finally say, we're done with your shitty ass games, we're not gonna buy your crappy fucking video games anymore. We're not doing it. We're not buying them anymore. We're done with it. We're done with this franchise. We're gonna go play something else instead unless you finally decide to fix your shit. And that's pretty much all you have to do, but nobody wants to do that, I guess. And I'm here just screaming into the void, begging players to finally give up on this dog shit franchise that hasn't been good since 2012 with Black Ops 2. And yeah, I'm just incredibly disappointed with this game. I'm incredibly disappointed with the player base who still continues to keep playing this game and supporting the game and trying to defend it when there's nothing to defend. The devs fucking hate you. They don't care about this game. They're continuing to dig their fucking graves and they're about to die in it. So, whatever. I guess there's not really much else to say. This is at the bottom of the tier list, right next to Call of Duty Vanguard, but for a multitude of different reasons other than just being a really bad video game. But yeah, that's pretty much the entire tier list for me. I don't really have much else to say. I had a lot to say about Modern Warfare Roman numeral 2. I had a lot to say about Modern Warfare II, whatever, again, you want to call it. I had a lot to say because there just needed a lot to be said. A lot of people really like this game, and for the life of me, I really don't understand why they like it. This is my tier list. If you disagree, I don't care. If you liked the video, be sure to leave a like, and if you want to see more videos sort of like this in the near future on other different topics and maybe different games, let me know in the comments and maybe I'll do them. Subscribe if you do want to see them, by the way. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll see you guys next one. I'm out. Peace.